welcome. This is Clever Orbits. I am your host, Louis Brantmeyer, founder and CEO of Speak Powerfully. Now, today we're here to talk to you about the Matrix Resurrections. And with me, I have our regular co-host, PhD in psycholinguistics and artificial intelligence researcher, Dr. Richard Futrell. Hey, buddy.
Hi, all.
Welcome. And what an absolute treasure. It's like a Christmas gift to be honored with my friend, Brett Thomas, who, Richard, you want to introduce our special guest today?
Yeah. Brett Thomas is quite so he's just some highlights. He's a veteran management consultant. He's been guiding CEOs, senior executives at all kinds of companies, played a key role in pioneering the fields of conscious business and conscious leadership, which has helped hundreds of founders and senior executive teams scale their business to tens and millions and hundreds of millions. And he's best known for applying developmental psychology, human potential psychology, and integral theory, which I'm sure we're going to hear about, as the director of Integral Institute's Business Leadership Center. So he's worked closely with Ken Wilber. We hear that he has some connection to Lana, the director of the film we're about to see. And he runs a nonprofit that uses integral leadership to support leaders in developing countries, members of parliament, military generals, tribal leaders, and local villages. Welcome to the show.
Hey, friends. Thanks for having me. And I'm tickled that y'all are interested in my unique perspective as a lover of all of the work, really, of the Wachowskis, but especially as a huge fan of the Matrix trilogy and now series. So really delighted to be here with y'all.
Totally. Super excited, man. Well, we will more or less table our intricate labyrinthine on my side appreciation. I actually haven't checked in with Richard yet, so I don't know. I really love the new film. Richard, did you more or less like it? Did you more or less enjoy it?
I enjoyed it.
Or we're going to have to take this outside.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I enjoyed it on the whole.
Excellent. So it was such a pleasure and a treasure. Brett and I and a contingent from Austin watched the movie together in person in IMAX on opening night. And I'll get more into that experience probably later. But for now, I knew when we started talking, Brett, right after the film, that we had to have this conversation. We had to have a space for it to continue because there's such richness and such depth. And so, I'd love to hear your connections to Ken Wilber and Lana, and then just your overall thoughts on the film.
Sure, happy to give a little overview and some context. So, first of all, I saw the first film when it came out in 1999, and I just loved it. It became really my. Essentially, people ask, when you have like icebreakers, what's your favorite movie? I pretty much always say The Matrix. So, full disclosure. I'm a huge fan of the work, of the art, and so I'll be a bit of a defender of some of their choices, and Lana and her team's choices in the fourth film, because I'm just really an appreciator of really kind of what it is they're doing. A few years later. A couple years later, my first daughter was born, and she's 21 now. Her name is Trinity Thomas, so that gives you a little bit of a clue as to my appreciation of this particular work. And she's seen all three films and is now old enough to really appreciate them. And to even appreciate being named after Trinity and getting it. She's pretty deep and pretty complex for a 21-year-old. And we intend to. She's pursuing her She's a singer-songwriter, musician, who's been on the Grammy ballots a couple times already and has signed on a record label. And she's living in Nashville now, but we're going to try to find a way to watch it together, even if we kind of watch it from home together. So, a couple years after that, I had kind of the life-changing privilege that very few people are so fortunate. I got to meet Ken Wilber, and the work I was doing, applying developmental theory and integral theory in the area of leadership and leadership development that I'm still doing now, although I've sold the Leadership Academy and started a nonprofit and become a bit of a outspoken iconoclast and critic of how leadership is often done and so on and so forth. Now, that my kids are grown and I'm kind of moving into the next phase of my own career. But I mentioned that because it's kind of relevant. That's how I met Lana. So I was working with Ken Wilber and the senior faculty members. I was the youngest senior faculty member of Integral Institute back in the early 2000s. So it was 2003 that at this point, the Matrix number 2 and number 3 were coming out. The films and the creators of the films, at that time known as Larry and Andy Wachowski, basically got attacked by a slash piece, one of these kind of flamer hit and run slash pieces by a New York Times editor. And so there was a little bit of controversy around the creators of The Matrix, Larry and Andy at that time in 2002, 2003. And Ken, I was at Ken's loft with a few other members of the Business and Leadership Center of Integral Institute. And he shared this article with us. And he's like, you're going to get a chance to, some of you are going to get a chance to meet Larry, who's begun her transition, being a trans woman, to Lana. And this is kind of the background and context of really him, now her, just beginning the transition to her, really being attacked, by, certain people that have certain strong points of view. And the big emphasis, instead of focusing on, the second and third film coming out, that of course was, I think any reasonable person who knows anything about the film industry in the early part of the 21st century, this art form, The Matrix 1 and also 2 and 3 just had a huge influence on not just film and the business of film, commercial art in the form of blockbuster films, but also really culture. I mean, literally, even then it was already very clear. It's so much clearer now in hindsight that The Matrix and the whole idea of living in a simulation and unplugging from the Matrix, overcoming your childhood programming to become what in developmental psychology we call self-authoring, and then self-transforming and transcending and waking up, and all these things, they popularized so much of that in popular culture. So that was very interesting. And not to make the story too long, but I got to sit down. There was an international conference happening, and it was with the spiritual division of Integral Institute. So Father Thomas Keating and Brother David Steindl Rast and several enlightened Zen teachers, Genpo Roshi and Junpo and all these others came in, and Lana was there, and the lead singer of the band Live was there, and a bunch of other, I don't think Tony Robbins or Deepak Chopra was there, but a lot of people that are very famous and very accomplished. Rick Rubin was not there, but he's one of my heroes, are actually integralists. No one knows this, and they all point to Ken Wilber, my mentor, as one of their teachers. So I'm like, this is a long time ago. So I was in my early 30s. in the 2003. So I'm like the youngest kind of senior faculty member, but partying with the kids who are now PhDs and popular authors and all this stuff and Harvard professors. But back then they were 20. Some of the kids. I'd like to say during the day I was in meetings with the faculty, and at night I was in the kids' dorm room doing bong hits because I was right in between. I was in my early 30s. I'm a old Gen Xer, and so I'm kind of a bridge between the boomers, which were my seniors that were there at Integral Institute. So got to sit down with Lana and her new wife, who's a PhD in human sexuality and a famous dominatrix in San Francisco in the Bay Area. That's how they met, which says a lot about the scene where Trinity meets Neo in the club, which is a BDSM club. And so, I mean, I was just like, holy shit, this is unbelievable, completely surreal and fantastic. And Lana, just to speak, personally about Lana looked exactly like Larry, but with long hair. And I didn't discuss it with her, but Ken, told us in advance, a handful of us that we were going to be meeting, hey, look, Larry just begun the transition. So he's growing his hair out, he's taking female hormones, and he is, has recently come out as transgendered, which we'll come back to when we talk about the meaning of the film. And so what an incredible privilege. I'm just a lucky son of a bitch. I'm so lucky got to meet Ken and a lot of these other just unbelievable humans that are kind of students of integral theory and integral psychology and integral philosophy and Ken Wilber's work and so on and so forth. And so that really did define, my certainly worldview and a lot of my work in the world. And, and then that was around the time again in 2003 that the, number 2 and number 3 were coming out. Of course, we thought that was certainly fascinating back in the early 2000s that this famous filmmaker and genius, one of the brothers, Wachowski, was, transgendered. But nothing prepared me for a few years ago when I read that Andy is now Lily and begun her transition. And wow, I mean, just I have some thoughts about that too. I think they're probably aliens, honestly, who are just so unparalleled levels of geniuses that, like they came here from another planet, found a way to get into the slipstream, reincarnated as a human, as probably a lot of people did over the last 100,000 years. And they're like, let's begin. We were born as boys, but let's also see what it's like. Let's make the most of this life and see what it's like to be women. I haven't discussed personally their personal philosophy on going from male to female. But I'll kind of wrap up my initial kind of share by saying, look, the Matrix means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, as all great art does. But what's super unique about the 4 Matrix films, which is cannot be said about many other, if any others, it's totally self-conscious in the sense that these 2 geniuses had already read and studied, and I don't know if they'd completely mastered in their 30s as young men before they began their transition, but as young humans, they had non-dual realization. They had a taste, one taste, knowing your one true face, being one with everything. They were already somewhat enlightened. And I know dozens of enlightened teachers, so I feel like they're close friends of mine. I've been a meditator for 30 years. I feel like I have some sense of what that word means. People who don't claim to be enlightened, but they can point to others that seem to have some non-dual realization, as we call it in the traditions. But I'll tell you what, these are unparalleled geniuses, and they had had a pretty high level, if not close to a mastery level, of understanding pretty much all branches of philosophy and psychology. And so the Matrix films are very deliberate with their metaphors and their meaning. But what's a super weird meta thing is that two things. First, it's one of the only films in the world that I'm aware of that instead of having the directors explain the meaning of every scene or their thoughts about every scene and interpretations on the director's cut, they asked a couple of philosophers, including Ken Wilber, to describe what it means. Ken Wilber being their mentor, and so it says a red pill. I'm going to go really meta and postmodern here. The film is a red pill, and a lot of people reject it. They take it and they spit it out, and that's individual. So we talk about integral theory. That's the individual dimension. The collective dimension is it's also been a red pill for our culture. It actually helped a lot of people move from pre-modern and traditional and what developmental psychology calls socially defined as a metaphor. Watching this film, just getting interested in the themes, maybe starting to do yoga or meditation or exploring alternative sexuality such as BDSM, or questioning gender identity and what all this means, because it's an inquiry. They got us talking and thinking, and it was so catchy, like an earworm, like a great song that sticks in your mind, the hook. This film, as a work of art, has stuck in the mind like an earworm for modern and postmodern society. As such, I mean, we can talk about how it affects an individual, but we can also talk about the 20 plus years now, that it's been affecting our society, and how even now, I watched a few interviews with Keanu Reeves. I've never met Keanu, but I'm a huge fan too. One of my favorite artists and certainly actors. And I've seen several interviews with him in the past few weeks, and how different today's kind of Gen Y and and youth and people today are reacting to essentially an extension of the same story and the same metaphor versus how people reacted over 20 years ago, because society's evolved. We're fully in postmodernism now, whereas back then we were really just kind of entering it, and the vast majority of viewers were still traditional or modern. So I mean, unbelievable. Like, it's just, we could talk about this for hours, but those are some of the key aspects of my background and context. And, full disclosure, as a fan, as a believer in this work, so I'm admittedly biased, but at the same time, I feel like zooming way out, I definitely can bring a kind of meta perspective to it. So I've talked a lot, but Lewis and Richard, feel free to, how does all that land with you, or any aspects of that? Would love to get your blink reaction as kind of also a surrogate for your audience, who I know love science fiction and are brilliant intellectuals and philosophers in their own right, and know more about some of this than I do. But give me a little bit of a calibration here and a blink response to our discussion so far.
Absolutely. So I'll take the reins first, and then I'll pass it to Richard. That gem of and maybe I'll have a follow-up question before I pass it. That gem of these filmmakers being enlightened, like, there's all these hints, right? But not having done, and I know enough about samadhi and satori and kensho to see it as like a good to be pursued. And I've been on the path of meditation for 10 years. Like, when I first started doing transformational work, like the Landmark Forum or Serious Practice of Meditation, there was an urban legend passed around that the Wachowskis had done the curriculum for living, the three primary courses in Landmark, and that they for their community project, they had based these films in some measure on their experience of those courses, among many other things. And so, I don't know, and I'm not really worried if that's true or not, but the thread of knowing or being able to view these films from within that frame, that, oh, these are people who we can reasonably assert actually experience some of these high mystical states of concentration or non-dual awareness, like that changes. I mean, that not only changes Matrix Resurrections, that completely alters my experience of the first three. And
it's important context. It's important context, yeah. Right? These are not amateurs who are writing about concepts that they came across in some dusty philosophy book. These people have a direct experience of what they're trying to bring to the screen in a certain sense. It's very important context.
Yes. And so my only other primary follow-up question before we dance with Richard here is I love the commentaries by Cornel West and Ken Wilber. In fact, I love the commentaries by the critics as well on those first three films. And I'm really hoping they do the same treatment for this film when it comes time. But the if you will, very rich context that Ken Wilber sort of dances around and points to and gestures towards without, making an orthodox dogma of it, is this notion that basically those three films, the first three, can be viewed as a integration of mind, body, and spirit within an individual soul through, all this phenomenological experience of dealing with the exiles and different portions of the mind and different portions of the body, and then seeing that, spirit is actually in machines, that spirit is everywhere, and reconciling that within himself and reconciling himself to that reality, basically talking about Neo's journey. What that left for me, like it was a fairly complete journey from from the surface of consciousness through the realms of power to the body of the absolute, if we take the Buddhist kind of look. And so I'm curious how you would see this fourth film integrating with that hermeneutic, or adding to that hermeneutic, or what it brings to that.
I love that. Do we want, Richard, should I go ahead and respond first before we go over to you?
Please do.
I mean, I was as fascinated as anybody when I read a couple of years ago that they're making a fourth Matrix film. How do you do that when it was complete? They ascended through all the stages of consciousness, dealt with, all these different dimensions of, in integral theory, the different dimensions, the system dimension, the cultural dimension, the individual dimension, the collective dimension, again, going through the stages of consciousness from survival to archaic and tribal, to, traditional and, Christian mythology and kind of monotheism and the one way to think and behave, and kind of a nod, more than a nod, rich metaphor of the monotheistic traditions, including the patriarchal traditions, of course, with the kind of Christ-like messianic figure through, global, international, obviously tons of Asian and Buddhist and Hindu inspired, all of it. I mean, they covered it all the way up through transcending self, transcending ego, to, recognizing that what's behind ego ultimately is kind of the one source that kind of animates all life and consciousness, and then merging and then bringing together, obviously non-dual, the bringing together non-dual, dual, etc., bringing together the apparent duality of technology and the world versus consciousness and spirit, you know, represented obviously by machines and man, natural humans, and then integrating and coming together, even so far as to dealing with shadow, like you say, the exiles. I mean, you don't have, they didn't make the metaphors so difficult to understand. Some of the metaphors are fairly thin. Exiles, like those are the parts of us that, you know, the earlier, you know, kind of parts of us. Those are the Trump supporters, basically. Those are the imperial mindset, the you know, the people who stormed the Capitol, you know, the people that still have a Bronze Age belief system, even in the modern age. It's so like these creators of the Matrix, and obviously you have the Wachowski siblings and then all the writers, right, that they collaborated with, and I'm sure they're coaching and mentoring. You need to read this book, you need to read that book. So, you know, they certainly wrote the first treatment, but they certainly also had a lot of help with brilliant, you know, genius writers who assisted, and other filmmakers of all kinds and so on and so forth. But what they've done with the first three, and then they took it to a whole nother level with the fourth, which we'll get to in just a second, is, I mean, it is a college course on philosophy turned into a 2 hour times 3, 6 hour, very compelling presentation. And then you add another 2 hours, roughly 8 hours. Okay. Or yeah. So, I mean, it is truly like a PhD in philosophy and psychology and human culture, multiple PhDs. You know, if each scene had endnotes or footnotes, if it were a book, the endnotes and the footnotes would be 5 times the number of pages. So, and this is where we're going to zoom in and out from kind of speaking of something in a more of a concrete way, and then the zooming way out and going really meta, as the millennials these days say, and a lot of us say, integralists say. But I mean, holy shit! Like if you don't, it's a fractal, and it's accessible to people at every level of consciousness, even the people who storm the castle and Trump supporters, and people who drive big monster trucks and think that people who care about others are socialists. I mean, everybody. You mentioned the Lewis. You mentioned the LifeSpring or Landmark, the Landmark Forum, whatever, Landmark Education. But here's the crazy thing: the born again Christians said the same fucking thing, Lewis. The Catholics said the same thing. The modernists who are climbing the corporate ladder, who it's all about not only learning to win the game, but changing the game and going to the next level and changing the game. They say, oh, well, these guys are obviously students of Peter Drucker and modern capitalism, you know, because they're the winners. You know, look how Neo won at the end. You know, it's like no matter what worldview or level of consciousness, or no non-dual realization at all, no enlightenment, you literally think your mind is yourself. And there's no, you know, I have friends here in Austin that are not spiritual, and they're, you know, they're very scientifically. Wherever you are on that spectrum, that's the crazy thing about this. Almost, well, I don't even need to say almost. Well, yeah, I will say almost, because some people are rejecting it. So the people who don't reject the red pill that is the Matrix trilogy, and now, how do you say quadrology? Is there a way to say that, you guys?
Quadrology, I think.
Series. Yeah. Is series.
Tetralogy.
It sounds too weird. It sounds too nerdy. But the Matrix films, now with the 4, they're a fractal. They're like a hologram. Whatever angle you turn it, more importantly, whatever angle you're looking at it from. I'm a Trump supporter, imperial mindset, you know, hate women, march with the fascist, you know, neo-Nazi, all the way up to born again Christian, Catholic or whatever, evangelical or Muslim or whatever they are. You can be a thinker, an absolutistic thinker, as Claire Graves called it, in any religion, obviously, you can be an absolutistic thinker, amber, as they say in Integral Colors, and be an atheist. All the way up, no matter where you are, what culture you're in, from the angle you're looking at this hologram, there's something there that's interesting and entertaining. And if you're open-minded enough and you don't reject the red pill that is the Matrix films, you can appreciate it. Now, some people don't. They think it's stupid. I literally saw a post on Facebook. I couldn't believe it. One of my Facebook friends, not somebody I know in real life, but somebody I've seen their name before in my feed. This woman literally said, The Matrix 4 is nothing but vomit and diarrhea. Do not see it. That's literally how some people hate it that much. And so, but I would say for those that aren't rejecting it outright in that way, for whatever reason, an allergic reaction to it, whether it's the art or the psychology or the philosophy or the meaning or the expectations, it didn't meet their expectations. So now they're going to become a hater. For those, with those exceptions, it's a hologram, and whatever angle you're looking at the hologram, you can see something. That is sheer genius. That's actually integral leadership, because the Buddha said, meet people where they are. Well, he said, the historical Buddha Shakyamuni said, teach people according to their ability to understand. Upaya in Sanskrit, which we translate into English as skillful means, which is essentially what integral leadership is. We add integral psychology. So now it's like, okay, what are people's worldviews? What are their beliefs, their value systems? How do they orient to the world? What are their abilities, cognitive ability, emotional ability, moral level of development, et cetera? And then, how can we kind of translate, or to quote the late Stephen Covey, speak into their hearing? That's what integral leadership is. That's also what upaya was, or skillful means, in the time of the Buddha. Which is super influences these films. But that's the amazing thing is, no matter where you are, unless you have chosen to reject it or subconsciously having an allergic reaction to it and rejecting it, you can appreciate it. And it's funny that when the Wachowski brothers at the time were asked in 2000, what is this film about? Do y'all remember what they said? It's kind of famous. Either of you guys, Lewis, Richard, do you remember what the Wachowskis say? Their official answer to the question what this film is about?
I have no idea.
Recall.
Richard?
I don't recall.
It's a movie about robots and kung fu. That's literally their answer. But do you see the genius in that? It's about robots and kung fu. That's their answer. And then when asked to do the director's cut, they're like, no, the art speaks for itself. But the reason the art speaks for itself is not because they're fucking posers who read a book on postmodernism and then wrote some postmodern script. And so they're not erudite or sophisticated or nuanced enough to actually speak to it. That's what some of the critics that don't get it might say. No, the reason they say the art speaks for itself is that's the purpose of the art. In this case, they made it as a modern metaphor. And a lot of expert critics have recognized this and said that. They won't say it, but at least not publicly, but it's obvious by what they have said in being ironic, it's about robots and kung fu, that they clearly know that they made it as a metaphor. But here's the thing, guys. It's the most meta metaphor ever made. It's the first global symbol or metaphor that I'm aware of that is informed by all other metaphors up to the early part of the 21st century. Meaning that this metaphor weaves in all the other metaphors. Like, holy shit, that's wild.
It incorporates philosophy and science and spirituality and religion. And I love, you've totally won me on this Matrix as red pill, as psychoactive, as psychedelic. I mean, I'd say it's my favorite art that I've ever been exposed to.
It's not
and-
only is it the ultimate postmodern art, but it might be the first mainstream integral art. Meta, postmodern. Does that make sense? Because it incorporates and weaves in a making subject object, not subject as subject. Not like I don't understand Christianity, or I don't understand Buddhism, or don't understand non-dual, or I don't understand the dualism between technology and nature, or whatever. But having made that object, having actually a really good understanding of it, and then creating an artifact. But let me answer your question. So that brings us to number 4. And this will be fun because I have strong opinions about this. And I posted a couple of Facebook, not pulling any punches, essentially, okay, setting the record straight. And here's what I've said in my Facebook post to all these people that I consider to be really, really not getting it. And it's, look, art is subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So everybody has a right to hate this film, or to hate the music that I like, or to hate the books that I like. So not trying to take people away from their right to subjectively not like this art. However, I have some strong feelings about that. I feel like they're not getting it. And I feel like to the degree that they're saying, oh, they totally screwed up here, there's so many flaws. And I'm like, Jesus, dude, guys, these creators, including the team, created a $1 billion franchise. They have teams of millionaires who are all geniuses at what they do, considered to be the very top of their field. Screenwriters, designers, set designers, costume designers, producers, executive producers, directors of photography. These people, most of them are millionaires, and a lot of them make $1 million a year. They're some of the best in the world at what they do. And they spent years, not 10 hours or 100 hours. Every one of them literally spent thousands of hours on their edits of the screenplay, on their edits of that scene, of how it all ties together. And you have these people that hate the film, and they're saying, oh, it's terrible, they made all these flaws, thinking that that was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, man. It was a design choice. You have these geniuses who completed a trilogy, and then chose, we're gonna make a film that's meta about the first 3 films. The ultimate postmodern, or even postmodern statement, where we're gonna find a way, and it's gonna have to be very clever to pull this off, and it was, and they did. We have to find a very clever way to take the complete story of The Matrix, which was, again, multiple PhDs in philosophy and psychology and human culture and anthropology and sociology, wrapped into 6 hours, roughly 3 2-hour films. We're going to now go meta and create a 4th film, but it can't be just a sequel or a prequel, because the first 3 were complete. So how do we do it? It'd have to be incredibly clever. They would have to come up with some crazy convention, like the whole first 3 films were a hallucination or were a dream, like Inception, or happened, but then the whole thing is turned into a game that now Neo is in the Matrix. They reinserted him in the Matrix. They brought him back to life after he died, and Trinity, reinserted him into the Matrix, but in order to keep him alive, because they had some reason to keep him alive, maybe it creates more power or helps keep the universe going, which does make sense. Shiva, Shakti, masculine, feminine, the power of love. Most philosophers say that those are the fundamental building blocks of reality. Shiva and Shakti, masculine and feminine interacting, self wanting to know itself, so splitting off and then finding itself again. So they'd have to come up with a really clever way of saying, some convention that how do you acknowledge in the fourth film the first three films? And maybe there's more than one way to do it, but it's hard to come up with a convincing way to do it. And the way that they chose to do it, for me and a lot of other true Matrix fans, worked beautifully. And so my take on it, very simple. I thought that the convention they came up with was very clever and was effective to say that, you know, his memories, they've convinced him was only a video game that he created. That's Inception, which is dream within the dream within the dream, Plato's cave, waking up, seeing the shadows on the cave, trying to convince people it's real, but they don't believe it. Like, I mean, are you fucking kidding me? It's just genius. You know, it's like amazing. I mean, I could, you know, it's like, it would just, what brilliant screenwriting. But then the other thing they did, and Lewis, you and I were in the theater together, is the first few minutes of the film. I mean, I don't know, the first 20 or 25 minutes of the film, to me, was so entertaining. It was almost like the filmmakers were playing a joke on me. Like, is this a preview for The Matrix, where they're going meta and breaking the fourth wall and making comments about Warner Brothers are forcing us to create a fourth film? Only they said, you know, video game. And then all these nods, like the opening scene is like recreating the first opening scene, but with new actors. And you're like, wait a minute, what the hell is going on? It's like a long joke, but that has a great punchline when you're like, no, this is really happening in a convincing way, not to some of the critics who are rejecting the red pill of The Matrix itself, for reasons that I can speculate on about their psychology, why they can't embrace this. But I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And it was the ultimate postmodern art that points back to and recapitulates and recontextualizes the previous version of the art. That's what postmodern art is. But integral art is postmodern. And that's what they did. They did like this Inception thing. And the whole first three were a video game. But then you realize, no, they were real. But they had convinced him of this. And so I thought it was incredibly clever and convincing and believable, which is nearly impossible to do, but I think they pulled it off. And then secondly, and more importantly, for Matrix fans like myself, all the nostalgia was incredibly rewarding. I mean, how many films are nostalgic and make you feel happy and you're remembering fond memories of a time, you know, a period piece, because, you know, a Dazed and Confused film right here in Austin about the 70s, or movies about the 80s, or movies about the 90s, or whatever. You know, it's like, it was so nostalgic that I was just gushing. Like, I was just like, it was incredibly emotionally satisfying for me as a lover of the first three films, with all these little Easter eggs and nods and inside jokes, you know. And then ultimately, they did come up with a convention that worked, in my opinion. They made it very rewarding for Matrix lovers. And at the same time, they made it entertaining for people that never saw any of the first three films, because it is a movie about Kung Fu and robots. It's an action film with all the requisite action scenes that you would expect from, you know, a blockbuster, the fourth installment of a blockbuster action series with, you know, cool graphics and all that stuff. So I think they absolutely aced it. And I could not be more proud of Lana and her team and everybody involved. I'll wrap up by saying Keanu, I saw in an interview just a couple days ago, he said, if you think about the scope, especially the script and the meaning of what this film does, someone would have to be absolute genius filmmakers to pull it off, because it's pretty difficult to do what they've done. And they just have to be incredible geniuses to pull it off. Like, that's, you know, he's the actor reading a script. He's a great actor, but he's acknowledging an appreciation of the depth here. So I'll stop there, Lewis. Did that answer your question in a very detailed way? Hopefully interesting way.
it came close. It came close. I've got one sub question.
Yeah,
And I know
yeah,
or what is
yeah.
it he says? Time is always against us. So the
I love it. Nicely done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can extend our time, as Morpheus says. Time is always against us. Even in this interview, this discussion, this dialogue, time is always against us. That's so good.
it contributes to the nature of time, actually. But what I saw as the quintessential moment of the original trilogy was Neo seeing the yellow code of spirit and sort of surrendering into
Yeah.
basically non-dual awareness through ceasing to fight Smith, and that also happens to redeposit the source code in order to enable the Matrix to reset and upgrade with more freedom for everybody involved. And so there was a scene at the end of the fourth film that so Neo was in the Matrix when he had this sort of final moment of non-dual awareness, and arguably he'd been having those since the there is no spoon moment in the first film, and it was just exploring the phenomenology of what it means to be an enlightened being and the depths of it and the completion of it. So for me to see Trinity, and especially with the musical flourish, when she
Wake Up, but by Rage Against the Machine, but as a cover in a woman's voice at the end, right?
That, and then also it's literally the same sort of symphonic orchestral moment when she realizes she can fly, not long after, I believe, she's seeing the golden code herself through the Matrix on the top of that roof. So I'm thinking, that maybe this was kind of an abbreviated form of her own journey through that phenomenological experience of the distance from there is no spoon to complete non-dual awareness. She just, being a heart-centered woman, she did it faster, and it was actually easier and quicker for her. At least that's what I'm seeing, is it's kind of incorporating the other component, the Shiva and the Shakti now both go through that path. And I'm curious if that resonates with if you think that what she was seeing on that roof was golden code, because it was. Yeah.
Totally. Well, there's a level of nuance that we can speculate. Okay, so I don't know if the golden colors as a visual element was a nod to the golden code. Knowing these filmmakers and the fact that they spent years on this, and every single individual spent thousands of hours. You have to think about that. How many projects have you spent thousands of hours on? Writing a book, getting your master's degree, spending a decade in your, as an architect or as a nurse practitioner or as a computer programmer. Like, I want to ask your audience, how many things have you spent thousands of hours on? Every single main player making this film spent thousands of hours. And so these design choices, it's very, very unlikely that they're mistakes or flaws. They're deliberate. And so I would say, if I had to place a bet knowing them, yeah, that probably was a nod, because there's all these parallels, right? But whether it is or isn't may be less important, because the bigger theme that you're pointing to, Lewis, is the arc of enlightenment, the arc of going through levels of consciousness, maturing, becoming more cognitively, and increasing your consciousness complexity. And all the people who study developmental psychology and integral theory are familiar with these frameworks. And so that's what Trinity did. Trinity also accomplished what Neo accomplished. But what's really interesting to me, that I live in a goddess temple, and I'm very interested in the divine feminine traditions in Hinduism and Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism. And I'm a huge appreciator of the feminine and the divine feminine, masculine too, but man, I have a particular appreciation of the feminine. But look at what's happened. And again, why did a lot of people reject it? It's very interesting. The same reason a lot of people reject strong female characters. I heard one person say they made Neo a pussy in the fourth one. He went soft. He's now a pussy. He's not tough enough.
He feels now. He's
Exactly.
open to feeling.
And he has humility, and he knows his limitations. And he's like a mature Neo in his fucking 50s, not a young Neo in his late 20s who just realized he has superpowers. It's so interesting. I think the way people react to it says a lot more about them than the film. I think it's a litmus test for their psychology. And I think that it's almost like echolocation. The bat throws something out there, throws the sound wave out there, and the way that it comes back to the bat tells you where. We talked about that back in the early 2000s, military grade perspective taking, and I called it echolocation, where if you throw an artifact out, the way people react to it tells you where they are in their constellation of developmental psychology and in what Ken Wilber calls their cosmic address. And so if people react by saying, oh man, they turned Matrix into a pussy, well, that tells you they're probably kind of more toxic masculine, less mature, what David Data would call first stage masculine, macho jerk, tough guy, the guys who stormed the Capitol, the Trumpsters and all of this, the guy who, the people who like, QAnon and so on and so forth, because they don't like a feminized or sensitive male, because that goes against their worldview. But look at what they did with the feminine. So it's through partnership. Rianne Eisler, who's also an integralist I met through Ken Wilber, who's an anthropologist, who wrote the most appreciated and probably most important book about patriarchy called The Chalice and the Blade. The move is not from patriarchy to matriarchy. Those are just two forms of patriarchy, one with women, one with men. The move is to partnership. And so, again, it's following the trajectory of society's evolution over the last 20 years. It's now about partnership. It's not one male hero and a supportive female who is eye candy and who's a great fighter and has a nice body and so on and so forth. What did they do? They said, no, Neo can't do it without Trinity. The whole premise is the masculine and feminine, like Shiva and Shakti, are holding the universe together. The tension, the sexual tension, if you will, and romantic tension between the desire of the masculine and feminine to merge, but being prevented from, is the very thing that drives the universe. And that's kind of what the architect was saying. And so it makes a lot of sense. So here at the end, who's the one who saves the day? It's not that she has to rescue Neo because he's just a pussy and he's completely washed up and can't do anything anymore as a superhero. He still has superhero powers, but he needs her. And then she's the one who completes that arc that you're talking about, Lewis, and becomes enlightened. And she can now fly, even though he can't anymore because he's just rusty. He learns to at the end, right? But he's rusty after 60 years of being in the pod. And being brainwashed by the Matrix, but look, isn't the rise of the feminine what's happening now? Feminism and feminine men embracing more feminine leadership styles, leaders having more of a partnership or caring about others or compassionate approach. Isn't that what the millennials and the Gen Z or whatever, all these new generations? And then look at gender fluidity. It's like, it's about transitioning. It's about transformation. It's not just about men and women who are trans, even though the filmmakers are. It's about transformation. And at the end, there's so many female lead characters now. Have y'all noticed that? Why? Because the rise of feminism, or the rise of the feminine. Let me be more clear. The rise of the feminine, because feminism has a dark side as well. But the rise of the feminine is what's happening right now. So again, it's so current. It's genius. It is a mirror of popular, not just popular culture, but human human development and human society. And I want to make sure we get Richard's take on it, because man, you're the expert on AI and all this stuff. But Lewis, I think it's brilliant how at the end it's very current. It's what's happening today and maybe tomorrow. So let's hopefully that was helpful,
Yeah.
Lewis. But I want to hear some of your thoughts, Richard. You know a lot more than I'll ever know about AI and about artificial intelligence, and this whole idea is, can machines actually become sentient or conscious, and will they have a soul? Non-dual. I mean, the argument of this film is yes, they will. I'm not 100% convinced of that, but what are your reflections? Because this film is also about AI and about artificial intelligence and machines, is it not?
Yeah. I would say I've been enjoying just laying back and listening to what you're saying and thinking through the movie, and it's like I'm tripping, thinking about it in different ways.
Well, it is psychoactive,
Nice.
isn't it? It is like we're
Well
tripping.
done.
The film is psychoactive.
Good job, well.
Nice.
But on the issue of on the duality, it seems like the biggest duality of all is the Matrix versus the real world in this.
Yes.
Maybe
the
not
most
the biggest,
obvious.
but
The most
certainly a big one.
obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the conclusion is not, we will destroy the Matrix. He doesn't kill the analyst or anything.
That's right.
The conclusion is that they end the movie in the Matrix.
Yeah.
They're flying around in the Matrix. They end. The conclusion is that what's real is the dissolution of the boundary between them, I think. But I don't know. In terms of like AI, the main, like the theme of AI for the last 20 years has been abandoning structure that you build in, abandoning stuff that a programmer writes in, and building systems that just adapt. You give them data and they adapt to the data. And that does way better than anything any human could ever program. These systems that learn and adapt are much, much smarter basically than any human programmer or any team of human programmers, even if you give them like 30 years. So
yeah. It's more complex.
Yeah.
Instead of being the
because it can handle the
architect.
Complexity.
Exactly.
Like,
Instead of being, it's
human being-
self-learning. It's self-learning, right?
A human being is limited by their own mind in terms of the complexity of the systems we can design. We can't design something as complex as the Matrix. All we can do is build a learner and throw data at it, and the learner will learn it because it can handle the complexity. It's not limited like we are.
Which they call the modal. Is there really such thing as a modal, or do they make up that word?
They made that up, but it's totally, it's plausible. They're evolving machines. And what the analyst is doing is he's evolving the Matrix in order to be able to counter the anomaly. And what the anomaly is doing is he's adapting in order to be able to counter the analyst.
Exactly.
And this is how it works.
But isn't that how human consciousness co-evolves with nature?
Yeah.
And is technology created by a human an artifact of nature? Meaning the nest is an artifact of the bird. Is the nest natural? It was made by an animal. Is technology natural? It was made by a human. I would argue that it is. And there's the duality coming back together, which is we're co-evolving with our tools and we're co-evolving with, but what they did, again, gives a nod to your area of expertise that I'm far less familiar with, which is computers and artificial intelligence. It's brilliant. I mean, it makes sense, right? It's like and then the Meta, look, it's so current. The Facebook changed their name to Meta, and they're trying to create a metaverse. And then all these other people are trying to create a metaverse. And what is a metaverse? It is a virtual reality. And then you have all these virtual reality tools that are becoming mainstream, and you can acquire them for a few $100 and get in the game. And absolutely, that's where we're going to, man. Oh, Unreal Engine 5. They just released, talk about art imitating life, imitating art. They released a Matrix demo that you can watch or download on your Xbox or PlayStation that recreates the scenes in the Matrix using Unreal Engine 5. That looks photorealistic. It looks exactly like the scene in the Matrix, except for it's actually a video game. And there's a character in the backseat that's a standard UX template that you can just drop her right in, and she looks just the same. And it's like art imitating life, imitating art, imitating life, like a hall of mirrors. So not only is it very current, but like the original Matrix trilogy, it's anticipating and foreshadowing and forecasting and really, in a certain sense, predicting what's going to happen over the next 10 years, isn't it? I mean, you're the expert on like,
one
is
way
that
we might
direction
go.
we're moving? In that direction we're
It
moving,
certainly
right?
seems to be the dominant direction. There's different forces and it's hard to predict, but that's certainly, yeah.
Incredible. What else? What else? Now, you enjoyed the film. Are there things about it that you would have liked had they done different or taken a different direction? You know,
Oh yeah. So
yeah.
my only criticism of the movie as a movie is the scene where they explain the plan, where they're going to go in to rescue to awake Trinity. That scene was complicated. I felt like I had to pause it and like write down what was going on. That's my only criticism.
Yeah.
But whatever.
I accept that.
Yeah, I mean, if there was one thing that the critics' commentaries made clear about the second and third films, it's that they could have been executed better. And I'm not here to argue that there's absolutely anything wrong with how it was executed. Hindsight's 2020. Right. So there's some more clarity. I mean, the film seemed a bit fast at times, but I loved the overwhelm and the overload and the confusion. Personally, I loved not quite knowing what was going on, especially in those first 30 minutes. I mean, I haven't had it does just what the commentators say in those first 30 minutes. It gets up in your gray space and flips the WTF light on.
And it confuses you, but it confuses you in a deliberate way by opening up slots that they're going to later put something into, right?
Totally. Now, I mean, I'm not sure I get the exact criticism of what you're saying, Richard, with that one scene. I do think that it was fast and that it was difficult
a little hard to follow.
Yeah, and I kind of, at that point, I was so in love with the film that I was like, all right, there's something that's making sense here, but it's not making sense to me, so it'll make sense in the second pass. I'm fine. And I get that they're trying to make this thing happen, and I'll grok all the details my second time through. Now, I don't, from long-standing engagement with Richard on this podcast, that Richard has in the past said things like, well, that's the responsibility of the filmmakers, not for us to see it again. So I don't know, Richard, what would you say?
I mean, honestly, yeah, okay. So this is a film that operates on multiple levels. On one hand, it's about robots and kung fu. And then there's many, many layers on top of that and many layers under that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, maybe this is a weakness in the robots and kung fu part.
Well, I would point this out. I remember the scene well. I've seen it twice now. I have a friend who's seen it 8 times. I've only seen it twice. Nice. But let's go back to that scene. It starts out in Io, which is the new Zion. Mm-hmm. And then she gets people to say yes. But then they go visit the little girl that grew up to be a badass technologist whose father created the new version of the Matrix that ultimately is powered by keeping incarcerated close to each other, where they sense each other's presence, and they keep trying to bring them together, but then it explodes and they keep, all this stuff. So her father, but then he got kind of killed by the Nazis, so to speak. And then she's now wanting to use her life to, in a certain sense, what's the word, vindicate him or whatever the word is. And so she has been dreaming up this plan her whole life. But here's the thing, Richard. The plan is made up of science fiction words that the writers made up. We're going to go into the vent that's the amniotic fluid that puts in the oxygen. And then we're going to take this character made up of magnetic particles that allows a sentient AI to be in the real world, and he's going to jump over, and then he's going to go through the vent, and then he's going to plug in. It's made up of science fiction elements, but then we need a real mind. I don't understand why they needed a real mind, but for some reason we need a real mind to pretend to be Trinity for a few moments, So, in a certain sense, the reason it was hard to follow is because most of it was made up shit. Right? Right? I mean, how could you understand magnetic particles that can exist in the real world that's a sentient avatar and amniotic fluid oxygenation vents and why they need to connect it was again made up. But the whole idea was we're going to rescue them by sneaking in and then sneaking out. I mean, it's essentially a breakout film of breaking a prisoner out with multiple layers of science fiction on top of it that we barely could grasp.
So to its credit, one of our fundamental foundational hermeneutics here at Clever Orbits is the pure, like, puzzle putting together pieces joy of finding in-universe explanations or coherentizing, sense-making hermeneutics.
Yeah.
For like the bits and pieces of it. So I mean, we'll probably have a whole nother podcast. I mean, when The Last Jedi came out, we had 3 or 4.
Yeah. The golden threads of transformational wisdom, as you described them. The hermeneutic Easter eggs.
Exactly. There's so many layers, there's so many levels. We're really just getting a first pass global, like, kind of frame within which the further investigation and appreciation of these films would be, validated as an ongoing endeavor. Literally, during the course of this podcast, by the way, one of my good friends, he runs an off-the-grid, self-sustainable village, an eco-village in Costa Rica, and he and I are now in conversation to create the outline for a 6-day retreat centered around the 4 Matrix films. Fantastic. Based on just what I shared of what we gathered from the first 30 minutes of this.
Hey, you know what? In addition to meditation and philosophy and integral theory, you need to do some kung fu. You need to do some, seriously, you need to do some kung fu. You need to actually do some breathing, some basic kung fu stuff, a little bit of Tai Chi, because that's super important part of all this. It's embodied spirituality, right? By the way, I didn't mention I have got my black belt in Kung Fu, Shaolin Kung Fu. So I appreciate all the Kung Fu and robots. Richard, I have to ask you though, what else would you say about the technology, the duality between technology and nature, the idea that machines can be sentient, the idea that humans can live in and out of these virtual worlds? And before you answer, there's one other comment that Keanu Reeves said yesterday. I saw an interview with Keanu Reeves, and in this interview, he tells a story about going to a dinner party last week with a director. He didn't mention the director's name, and the director asks Keanu to explain. The family hadn't seen The Matrix yet. And there was like a young, like 11 or 12-year-old preteen girl with the daughter of the director. And the director said, well, Keanu, you star in this new film. Can you explain to my daughter, and for those who haven't seen it, what's it about? And Keanu, unlike the Wachowski siblings, didn't pass on that question. He essentially described him saying it's about what is real, what is not real, these virtual worlds that we can go in and out of, and what's what if we didn't know if it was real or not? And that's kind of what he emphasized, which is fine, right? That is one of the main themes. And the little girl said, I don't understand. Why does it matter if it's real or not? And Keanu said, wait, you don't care if something's real or not? Do you see the difference in the generations at work here? And she said, no, I don't care if it's real or not. It doesn't matter to me. And then Keanu, in real life, in the interview, the people laughed and they said, what did you think about that? And you know what Keanu said? Cool. Do you see what's happening here? So this is part of my question over to you, Richard, the resident expert on technology and artificial intelligence and virtual worlds. What are your other reflections and thoughts? If it, adding to some, obviously I shared a lot about my point of view. I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about your point of view.
Yeah, well, this kind of ties in with an issue that Lewis and I discussed at great length in our initial series of podcasts about the first three movies, which is if the machines on the machine side of things want to have their optimal interaction with the humans, they want to extract the most energy from them. Let's say that's still their goal. Then what they should do is create a matrix in which the humans are thriving, in which the humans are happy. Like the optimal adapted machine would be one which is adapted to humans, which humans would be able to have empathy with, which humans would be able to treat as another spiritual being. Like there's like a question.
More of a symbiotic relationship between
exactly.
these organisms in some type of an ecosystem, more symbiotic.
What we called it in the old podcast was machine theodicy. It's like the question of evil, but in the matrix. Like, why are the machines beating down the humans instead of treating them well? And you have to see it as a process of evolution, and the movies.
But that's exactly what Morpheus did. Morpheus, number 2, was an agent.
Yeah.
And then he joined the side, as well as the sentient cetacean creature, the whale-like creature, and many others. Okay, what did they do? They became that when they developed a certain amount of sentience or consciousness, what did they develop? Just like humans do, compassion. And then they're like, hey, why now? But then you have the authoritarian rulers, you have the people who are in power, who have a worldview in which they want to maximize their profits or their power or their influence. I'll resist the temptation to say which political party that is, to not get too political here. But there are authoritarians. There are people like the architect that are like, fuck that. If you make people miserable, they produce more power. And isn't that what the pharmaceutical industries are doing? And isn't that the keeping psychedelics illegal? Isn't that many of the certain political parties that are maximizing war and maximizing consumer debt and maximizing college debt and actually keeping people sick in a certain sense, would be the argument. And isn't so the architect, he's like, no, making them balance between desire and fear is how we get the most productivity. And isn't that what Halliburton did and Vice President Cheney and the war in Iraq? They made $20 billion in the war in Iraq for Cheney, the CEO of Halliburton, with uncontested contracts. Like, isn't that what our architect is doing? Because the matrix is a lot like today. There's still a lot of people in power that lack compassion and that would rather maximize their profits, the oil and gas companies, with their predatory delay, pretending that climate change isn't real so they can make a few more trillion, and yet their grandchildren and great-grandchildren may have to live in a bubble or, have breathing devices. But so I think what you're saying is right on point, Richard. I think it's exactly right.
It's a question of what time scale these things
operate.
In the long run, if you want to maximize energy production or whatever, you make people thrive. In the short run, you squeeze them and exploit them.
But that's the difference between capitalism and conscious capitalism, isn't it?
I mean, from the AI perspective, it's simply a question of computational capacity. How far in the future can you think? Like, if you have a robot that literally can't think more than a second ahead because it's too difficult to simulate the world inside of its model, inside of its modal, I guess you could call it, then it's going to be a short-term thinker just because, it doesn't have the capacity yet to be a long-term thinker. And I think what we're seeing in the matrix is the computational capacity of the machine's increasing, their time horizon is increasing, and they're discovering a more positive sum solution to the issue that they're in.
Well, and here's the brilliant tie-in. Ken Wilber once handed me a book. I was in his loft in 2004, 2005, and he handed me a book of Elliot Jacques, who's dead now, but had written this book, who's a developmental psychologist, like Peter Drucker, who worked, not that Peter Drucker was a psychologist, but Elliot Jacques was a developmental psychologist who worked and did management consulting like Peter Drucker did. And he handed me this book, and the main theme of this book was called Requisite Intelligence, Requisite Complexity, and Task Complexity. So I'm going to get a little nerdy here with developmental psychology here, but some of your viewers will appreciate it. So, and it was the first time, and Ken said, I think this is important, you should incorporate this into the work we're doing with business and leadership. And that was that different people, as they developed their computational powers, Richard, as they developed their computational powers, also called cognitive complexity, as they develop their cognitive complexity, guess what happens? They think longer term. And you see this as a person working on an assembly line, or a supervisor or a foreman who's overseeing people swinging hammers or working on an assembly line, all the way up to a junior manager, a mid-level manager, a senior manager, an executive, a senior executive. The lower organizational structures, they're thinking days and weeks. The managers are thinking months. The mid-level managers are thinking quarters. The junior executives, directors, are thinking years. And the senior executives are thinking 5 to 10 years or decades. Mm-hmm. And so developmental psychology plays right along with, as well as, and that's the argument. Oh, here's another little Easter egg. Did y'all know that Ken Wilber wrote about AI, and if AI awakens and what that would be like, and and he wrote about it not in any of his nonfiction books. He wrote about it in the one fiction book he wrote, which is called Boomeritis. And in the fiction book called Boomeritis, he plays himself as a young college student in the fictional novel, and he's arguing with other people about this very issue that you are an expert in, Richard. So it's really interesting. So the argument would be if artificial intelligence does become sentient, whether it has a soul or not, and it's connected to non-dual, the ultimate God, Godhead, goddess, divinity. I don't know if it's going to have a soul or not, but it definitely will think. I don't know if it has a soul that's thinking, or it's just thinking. It's like our mind without our soul. It's because our mind is a program. Our mind is literally a computer program made up of language. But for those of us that had non-dual realization, our mind arises as an object in our sense of self that's connected to past lives and to the ultimate consciousness. So that's the non-dual realization, or the spiritual component. I don't know personally if machines are going to have that. I hope they do. But in any case, they will have a mind, and that mind will be self-conscious, just like unenlightened humans have a mind. Yeah. And they think that that's all they are, is their mind. They don't know that they have a soul or a spirit, that the mind is arising as an object. Once you start having kinshos and awakening, your mind starts arising as an object, and you realize you're not your mind. But I don't know if machines will ever get to that point, but they definitely will be self-conscious. They will think. They're already, but the argument is they're going to go through the same levels of development. They're going to go through the same stages and levels of development: pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. And if so, boy, it's going to be very dangerous when they're at the red or amber stages, to use integral colors. To put another way, the tribal and the early feudal Middle Ages, the Game of Thrones stage. That's still Trump supporters. That's called an imperial worldview. The Game of Thrones stage, or the monotheistic Catholic Church stage, where there's only one way and we're going to murder you, like in the Crusades, with the monotheistic traditions of Islam and Christianity. We're going to destroy you and murder you and colonize.
To watch, though.
Boy, but that's my concern, because imagine AI with the power when they go through the stage of the Game of Thrones stage, the imperial stage, or the monotheistic, concrete, absolutistic stage. But then here's the other question: how long will it take? Shouldn't they evolve way fucking faster than humans running on carbon, running on silicon? So couldn't they just do it in a few years, and boom, they're at the same stage that the Wachowskis are at and Ken Wilber's at?
That's what we hope. That's what we hope.
But
There's
then
a lot
they
of
would
others.
want happy humans. They would want happy humans, but they might
Well,
still
those called
see.
AI
But they might still
safety.
see us as cattle. We would just be farm-raised cattle and free-range cattle instead of batteries. What do you think about that?
So that was
I mean,
kind of kind of
it's
our
plot.
argument about, well, that was kind of our argument about the first three films, is that they have already gone through that developmental process, which is why Neo sees them as golden code when he, or at least the ones in the city, right? And maybe even Agent Smith is part of that process. They possess the spark of incorruptible spirit, to quote the Animatrix, and that they've simply through iterating achieved those higher stages of enlightenment. And that what is it that Ken Wilber keeps quoting in the commentary? He says the flames of hell are but the fire of God's love denied. So
so good. Oh, so good, right? Jesus.
Yeah, so maybe ultimately the machines will know better through pure calculus of variables and linear metrics how to bring us to enlightenment, and maybe the matrix itself will be a vehicle or something like it for us to attain enlightenment, or at least for the provocation of systematic choosing of enlightenment or not. I mean, you're not going to ever get all of humanity, or maybe we will someday get all of humanity opting in to a all is one. Let's create workability from love for everyone across the planet, sort of thing. I mean, anyway, I don't know if that ties in or that makes sense.
It does. It's very optimistic, and I certainly hope so. Do I feel confident? I don't feel super confident. Because look at Star Wars. They're, not that Star Wars is fact, but I'm just going to use it as a metaphor. They're millions of years into the future, and they still have dark and evil. And one of the developmental psychologists that was one of the volunteers when I was there at Integral Institute, and I would stack chairs with them, is now a world-renowned developmental psychologist out of Harvard, at the Harvard Education Department. His name is Zach Stein. And what Zach Stein explained to me is, hey man, the Darth Vader move is always a possibility. Because think about people that have a pre-modern worldview. They're evangelical Christians, or they're, very black and white thinking, but they're genuinely really, really fucking good people. And then think of moderns and postmoderns, especially postmoderns, conscious, woke crowd that are abject fucking assholes. I mean, they're just awful, right? And integral. You can have people at second tier that are assholes. So the point is, take me for example, on a bad day. But the point is that light and dark, being injured, being traumatized, lacking compassion, becoming a sociopath or a psychopath, happens at every level of development, you see. So this is very important. In integral theory and developmental psychology, Zach and others have pointed to that there is this blind spot among developmentalists and integralists that higher is better, or later stage is better, more complex is better. Being teal or turquoise, to use those colors, is better than being red or amber. It's better to be postmodern and woke and conscious and global and diversity sensitive than a Trump supporter who literally believes, that, Christianity is the only truth and the world was literally made in 7 days and the entire fossil record is an elaborate hoax. And if you care about other humans, you're a communist. My father literally teased me. I co-founded the conscious capitalism movement with John Mackey and a couple dozen others in the early 2000s. I met John through Ken Wilber. But my father, who's a Trump supporter, who has a traditional worldview, literally believes that because I believe in triple bottom line and that business should be a force for good and capitalism should should not just rape and pillage, that there are other things besides profit that matter. He literally thinks I'm a communist, and he will throw these jabs. It used to really piss me off, but no, he's in his 80s and I've just come to appreciate him. And I just think it's funny, but he literally will mention capitalism and say, oh, that's right, you don't believe in capitalism. He literally still says that to me because conscious capitalism to him is communism. And so, the point is, yeah, I mean, if you think about like all these different, oh my God, views, yes, there's this idea that later's better, but it's not necessarily. So yes, you can have enlightened humans, or let's say very cognitively complex humans, late stage, high stages, what do you want to say, later high stages, that are at these later stages that are postmodern or post-postmodern, metasystemic, like people on this call and many of your listeners, yet they can still be a sociopath or a psychopath and lack compassion or lack empathy. Their mirror neurons aren't working well. They took too much ibuprofen, according to some studies, and it causes a reduction in mirror neurons and empathy. Or they're on these pharmaceuticals. A lot of the anti-anxiety and a lot of the antidepressant medication crushes your empathy, and your mirror neurons aren't really connecting with other humans, and you're like the architect. Oh, let's keep them in those tubes because it produces. Isn't that how a lot of Republicans and right-wing conservative capitalists are? And profit's the only thing that matters. The purpose of a corporation is to make profits, and nothing else matters. You shouldn't care about the environment. You shouldn't care about your employees. So this is a very important thing to consider, Richard and Lewis, is just because the machines become even more complex than us doesn't necessarily ensure they're going to develop compassion and do the conscious thing. There's probably going to be bad ones and good ones, just like humans. And here we are, the drama of light versus dark continues a million years into the future, and we have Star Wars.
Well, hence also the machine civil war, right?
Right, exactly. It's so good. I'm gonna have to go. So let's wind down. Any comments from you, Lewis and Richard, before I leave, and then y'all certainly can continue the conversation after I go. Any reflections or thoughts as at least
Richard?
we lean? Yeah.
It's been great talking to you.
Thanks so
That's my
much for
thoughts.
being interested and interesting. Honestly, I live in the conventional world, like the eating the steak. Did you notice Neo was eating the steak just like Cypher did? Oh my God, it was so good. Yeah. Well, you know what? I eat a lot of steak, metaphorically, because most of my clients are not integral. And even a lot of my friends are not integral. Most of my friends are postmodern. They're hippies and conscious woke types. But I'd rather hang out with them. Than, the neo-Nazis or the Republicans or the Trump supporters. But whatever. Very small percentage of my friends are integral, postmodern, metasystemic, systems of systems, like y'all are, and many of your listeners. So the fact that we can have such a geeky, nerdy conversation and not come across as total assholes to the uninitiated I'm very grateful. Thank you for your interest. And it's very encouraging to me that there are podcasts and audiences and people out there that we can take off our disguise and reveal some of our true perspectives. So really enjoyed this. This is super fun for me. I really appreciate both of you a lot.
Definitely. Same here, man. Absolutely. Like Richard was saying, it has been very much like taking a psychedelic in only all of the best ways. And speaking for myself, but I imagine for Richard as well, I'm going to make an open door invitation if you've ever liked to return to this some more of the rest of the trilogy or other films or Critical Objects you would be certainly welcome. Richard, you think so?
I think you're muted, Richard. I didn't hear you.
I'm not. I didn't quite catch what Lewis said.
Oh, he
but I'm
broke
sure the
up.
answer-
I think he was just saying, he was asking you if you think your listeners would enjoy having me back at some point in the future on a related or different topic.
Absolutely.
Hey, this is, again, I know that my perspective is a little bit out there, and certainly not mainstream, but really delighted that you've enjoyed some of my perspectives and stories. And absolutely, if an integrally informed perspective or developmental psychology informed perspective, or meta-systemic thinking, systems of systems thinking perspective is ever useful. I'm a little bit of a anthropologist and sociologist, so I have a lot of thoughts about different worldviews and different parts of our culture. If that's ever interesting, happy to come back and continue the conversation or new conversation. So, hey, this has been really great. And I feel really honored that you guys asked. Again, not many people are honestly that interested in my perspective outside of how do we make the companies more successful or how do we make our leadership more successful. So I just really appreciate this opportunity to have such a rich conversation on these uncommon topics. You guys enjoy the rest of your conversation. I want to thank your listeners for their interest in some of these geeky topics, and certainly appreciate this community that y'all have created, and I hope to stay engaged with it in one way or another. And y'all enjoy the rest of your week and your holiday break, and I look forward to being in conversation with you in the future.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Dave,
Louis, great to be with you, man. Thanks for the invite. Talk to y'all soon. Bye for now.
such a pleasure. You're so welcome, man. All right.
Well, what's
shifting
left?
Gears. Shifting gears. I think we could do a whole podcast just on the Matrix film. Honestly, I really do. But shifting gears to detail the experience of this film, and wrap up all the little dangling threads and questions in classic Clever Orbit style. I'm gonna do a quick sound check. Richard, you catching all of this?
I'm catching it.
Beautiful. So you
It's been
down
caught.
to beautiful. So
I like
wanna
the
talk
analyst's
about-
blue glasses.
Yes, no elegant segue into our usual style of just super efficient, intricate detail obsessed. I like his glasses. Yeah, I mean, so I like the analyst because he revels in the detail of what it means to be human without actually respecting it. Like he delights in reverting to and precisely misusing human practices, ways of being, speaking. Like he seems to enjoy using psychoanalysis as a manipulation tool. And I thought that was just brilliant. It led me to wonder, like, what kind of a program was he before he made it his mission to helm the Matrix, right? What do you think about all that, about him as a character, as a program?
I wonder if he was a therapist from other machines, and then he was like, I can do this for people too.
I don't know that he was that good of a therapist. I mean, unless
there's something interesting going on here with the relationship of the movie to the mental health discourse.
Well, dude, yeah, there was a whole article that I read about how it was a great representation of sort of what it's like to be undertaking certain modalities of raw, real trauma therapy. And like, I had real compassion. We haven't even gotten to the moments of compassion yet, but as I was listening to the film again, because I've seen it 3 times, I was listening to it as I started my drive back to Tennessee to visit my family. And there's a portion where you can feel the depth of mind spinning and confusion and just aching, despair-filled suffering of uncertainty in Neo. Like, are these just video games? Are these memories? What's real? I'm not sure. And like, it takes all of what's cool and interesting about the original trilogy's questioning of reality and turns it into the lived, consistent experience of an actual human. And that's not fun. It is not fun to be questioning whether or not what you're experiencing is real ultimately. And it was just so painful. And I dropped down and knelt in prayer for anyone who has the experience of touching a higher or deeper reality and then finds themselves day in and day out re-eating the blue pill and sort of gaslighting themselves. Because that was another subtle thing that I really loved and appreciated. It was a mixture of manipulation and gaslighting. The analysts found more pleasure and more productivity both in getting Neo to agree with the analyst's power of creating new interpretations generally and the specific interpretations that he was coming up with in the moment in order to direct Neo's energy and attention. And I mean, we could have had a whole movie that was just about that. We could have had a whole movie, like an inquel, a midquel, if you will. Well, I would watch that, where it's just the analyst and Neo's cunning, clever, or sharp, freed mind, because the source code is active in him somewhere. And he's already built a certain amount of strength of character from the experiences that he's had. And so you can't just hand wave all of that away and reintegrate him into the matrix. You have to sort of turn that power in, and you have to re-qualify the real memories in order to gain some measure of power. But then there's this moment that I just really celebrate where Neo's, he doesn't buy it, even though he consciously, like, overtly buys it. The very next scene, he's drinking what appears to be vodka on the top of a building and is so open to the possibility that what his analyst, who he pays a lot of money to tell him what is going on, is wrong. He's so open to that possibility that he's about to jump. And I also love that scene independently because the drama of it is so deep, because you know that he doesn't know how to fly yet. So if he jumps, he will probably die in the Matrix. And then there goes Neo and the whole thrust of the film. So anyway, do you see the subtleties in the analyst and Neo's relationship the way that I do, or what do you see?
Yeah. It's good. I read a really funny response to the movie. It was just on some forum. It was from someone who hadn't seen the original three, and they thought that the entire movie was actually about Thomas Anderson's psychotic break. they thought the analyst was right. And this is just some weird fan. The guy was expecting that at the end he was going to be back on the couch.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting moments like that. I mean, like, just imagine you are a suicide survivor with a wild imagination who created some amazing.
This is exactly the story you would make up, right?
Yeah. You made some amazing video game, and then a character from your video game offers you a psychedelic in the bathroom. Like, what? Like that was a little crazy, and I totally felt for Neo in that moment. Like, yeah, because it really just legitimately seems like something is wrong. So
yeah, it really did. Like those early scenes, like in the bathroom, they really did feel like In a Beautiful Mind, where it really is, it was interesting to have that injected, that feeling of maybe it actually isn't real.
And I would have liked if they had played that angle a bit longer and a bit deeper for more of the
I preferred that stuff to the action movie stuff.
Yeah, so one of the arguments made about the action movie stuff, and let me ask, did you find, I can't so clear, I choose to ask, did you find the action in this film less satisfying in general?
Than the first movie? Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so one of the articles I read made a very cogent argument that the aesthetic of the Matrix, so basically they quote Baudrillard, who famously quipped about the first three films. He said, "This is exactly the movies that the Matrix would make to convince us that we had escaped the Matrix." So and of course, you know, his book is prominently featured in the first film, and he's got this weird post-structuralist, postmodern science fiction style of writing in general that feels more like fiction than philosophy. But long story short, if the Matrix aesthetic, including very well choreographed action scenes, is now being reinterpreted as part of a trilogy, and has its own very constrained and well-defined meaning and usage, then, you know, the only avenue left for deconstructing that whole system, or one of the avenues left, is to transcend it. So the Matrix is no longer green hued. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it's multicolored.
And there's no longer like an emphasis on a certain kind of cool action scenes, or you know, stuff like that. It's really, and I could share the article at some point. It was called "The Matrix Resurrections Takes Aim at the Matrix itself," and the whole idea is that she knew she was by using more naturalistic lighting and camera work, and not emphasizing, you know, through color, the presence of the Matrix or anything like that, that it was a way of transcending whatever in the original Matrix trilogy has become restrictive, or as we might say in Marxist philosophy, whatever has been recuperated. So recuperation is when the very system that you're trying to subvert takes the element with which you're subverting and uses it to reinforce itself. And re-territorialization is the way Deleuze and Guattari put it in Capitalism and Schizophrenia. You see this in Cesar Chavez, who, you know, at first was this revolutionary anti-capitalist leader, and then became on T-shirts at Hot Topic, right? So the Matrix itself was originally this red pill until, for example, the red pill movement co-opted it for its own political aims. So now she's like, all right, well, how do I violate the ways in which this film has been constrained by its usage and by the consequences of it existing in the public eye? And the quintessential expression of this that I love is where Elon Musk on Twitter last year, he says, "Take the red pill." And then Ivanka Trump says, "Take it." And then Lily Wachowski responds to both of those with "fuck you."
That's pretty funny.
It's great. I mean, so anyway, that's a whole piece to explore. I also really like, there was a YouTube video by Screen Crush that went through all the Easter eggs and interpreted the film. They have this idea that the analyst is both reboot culture and the YouTube algorithm. So the new Matrix, yeah, okay. I should have given that more time to land, I see. Yeah, so the first Matrix film, they argue, was about how we use the internet. This Matrix film is about how the internet uses us, and how it is continually tabulating data to keep our ire and fear continuously, so that we produce ultimately more energy or more profit for those who are marketing to us, right? So how does that land? Does that make sense?
I can see it. It seems like the analyst is something more profound than the YouTube algorithm, though.
Well, no,
he's
not just the YouTube algorithm. He's all of the forces of social media with their hooks in us, trying
I guess, if you go on, it's, I think that's one, well, he's certainly something which, so what the YouTube algorithm does is it looks at what you watch and it figures out what to show you that you'll watch more. And the analyst is certainly adapting to Neo. and telling him what he needs to be told in order to make him receive more of the analyst's input. But other than that, yeah, I think that, yeah, that's where the similarities end for me.
Which is why it was funny, because he's not just the YouTube algorithm. I see. So there's so many other awesome things just from the top. I mean, if I were to go back and start with an opening salvo, I'd say this was clever, fun, fast, witty, intelligent, subtle, moving, beautiful, inspiring, elegant, funny, delightful. I laughed, I cried, I cheered, I yelled. My mind was in fact blown. Seeing it with 20 awesome people at an IMAX theater with my beloved, my left, one of my favorite mentors on my right was just an absolute delight.
Lewis, your signal is being interrupted by the machines.
Emotional
The machines.
than he ever was. He's sure as an actor. Like talking about with this is a film that bespeaks a sensitivity to, we might call it the divine feminine or feminism. But one of the key scenes, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yeah, we were getting interference from the machines.
Yes. I think, yeah, so let's continue. I want this to come out. What do you think about this, the dream? It's like a learning system. Like, of necessity, any fight against it would need to be reincorporated into it in order for it to be effective. So
Hello? We're coming. They're jamming our signal. The Sentinels are coming. We need to